I can't stand getting sticky stuff on my hands. And working with cream cheese is just, ugh. Yeah. Hello everyone, welcome to CC Writes. My name is Cece Lepke, and today I am not writing at all. I decided to make a cheesecake, which is my favorite thing to make. The reason that I'm making this is that I have a going away party at work this week, and I wanted to make something special for my coworkers. If you don't already know, I quit my job so that I could be a full-time writer, and so I'm really excited about it. This is a really special occasion, so I'm making my absolute favorite recipe, which is my one that I came up with myself, and it's the best cheesecake recipe in the world. So the first thing I'm going to do is start by taking an entire package of graham crackers, and I'm just going to mash it all together to start making the crust for it. Okay, so we've got the graham crackers crushed, and the next thing to do is just add in a little bit of the spices. So for this, I want to keep it really simple, so I'm just going to put in a little bit of sugar, cinnamon, and allspice, and not in a large amount either. I'm just using a couple of teaspoons of sugar here. And I would say allspice, I don't usually like using more than about 1/4 of a teaspoon. And cinnamon, you can always use however much you want, because cinnamon is delicious, and who hates cinnamon? I am knocking over everything in my kitchen today. The next part of this recipe that you want to do is pour in the melted butter into the graham crackers. I just used 1 sleeve of graham crackers for this. And then this is about 1/4 cup of butter. But before I put it in, I want to make sure that I have my pan ready. And I'm also going to go ahead and preheat my oven as well. And we're preheating it to just 350 degrees. Okay, so now we can make the graham cracker crust. Okay, that's all done. My hands are a mess. Ugh. I always end up washing my hands like 30 million times while I'm cooking. Okay, so usually with this recipe, what I'll do is I'll cut up the apples, and I will put it all into, as I'm cutting it, I'll put it into an acid bath, so just like a big bowl full of water and lemon juice or some other sort of acidic thing like vinegar. Lemon juice is better because it just tastes better and it gives it a nice flavor afterwards. And then after all of the apples are cut, then I'll drain out all of the liquid, and then I'll throw in some, I put in 1/2 cup of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and however much cinnamon I like, which is a ton of cinnamon. I'll toss that all together and put it in the refrigerator, and I'll let it sit in the refrigerator for an hour, because I didn't want you guys to have to sit here and wait an hour for me to get all of that done. I did it beforehand. So here are my apples. And as it sits, it's going to generate a lot of liquid in it, and you do not want to get rid of that liquid. You want to keep it. So I'm going to drain the liquid from here and set it to the side. And we're going to be using that in a minute. I really hope this all doesn't spill out over my oven. You should be able to get about 1/2 cup, maybe a little bit more than 1/2 cup. If you don't have time for this, then a shortcut that I use on occasion, or actually a shortcut that I almost always use because I never want to spend this much time cooking, is you can use apple juice instead of this. it just makes it really good. There's a lot of sweetness in here because of the sugar and brown sugar that I put in. The flavor of just using the apple juice isn't as complex as what it could be, but I still think it's delicious. So I'm just gonna set this aside for now. Okay, so the very next thing that we do is prepare the sauce that's gonna go along with these apples. So I'm gonna set the apples over here. I gave myself very limited space to work with here. Okay, so in the saucepan, we are going to put in a half a cup of brown sugar, a fourth a cup of apple cider vinegar, however much of the juice that you could get from draining the apples. And we're gonna bring all of that to a boil. So I'm just gonna add this in now. And I already have all of my stuff pre-measured out. When I'm using apple juice, I usually use a lot more apple juice than what I'm using here. So I think I'm actually going to reduce the amount of apple cider vinegar that I'm putting in because I want it to be nice and sweet, and this is just to give it a nice tang. I think I'm going to put in maybe about a third of this for right now, and then I'll taste test it in a bit. And I'll wait to add more until I know for sure that it tastes good. So yeah, we're just gonna bring that to a boil. Wooden spoons are the best to cook with. They're my favorite utensil. We're gonna let this boil until it's reduced by about half. I'm just gonna let that sit for a bit. I haven't started the cheesecake part yet, and that's actually because I like to give, once this is done, I like to give it a little bit of a chance to cool once you toss it in with the apples, because I don't like putting it on top of the cheesecake when it's still hot. And it also needs a chance to thicken a bit. So once I'm done actually making this all together and have a chance to set it aside, that's when I'm gonna go ahead and start with the cheesecake portion of today's events. I just want to give it a little taste real quick. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, so reducing the amount of vinegar was a really good idea this time because I didn't use the apple juice. So it has like a really nice tart and sweet flavor to it. The brown sugar adds a lot of depth to it as well. When I'm making the cheesecake part of it, I actually use less sugar than I typically would if I was just making a regular cheesecake and not the autumn cheesecake. The reason I use less is because the apples are so sweet that the mixture of like a more sharp but slightly sweet cheese with the tart and sweet apples is just a much better balance. Oh, vinegar smell went straight up my nose. When it comes to the cheesecake part, one of the things that I'll do, I usually will let the eggs and the cream cheese come to room temperature, because it makes it easier to mix it in and hopes it get like a nice smooth consistency if it's at room temperature. If you don't have the time to let the cream cheese get to that temperature, then one of the things that you can do is put it in the microwave for a very short amount of time to warm it up a bit and make it more malleable. But again, for very, very short amount of time. You don't want it to melt completely or anything like that. This is bubbling up a lot. I may have put too much sugar in this, and I'm a little worried that it's going to get to the point where it's going to turn into a candy instead of a sauce like I want it to be. Yeah, it's already thickening up a little bit on its own. It's very nearly where I want it to be though. I keep making this mistake of just leaning directly over it so that all of the vinegar smell just goes straight into my face. Yeah, that's boiled down quite a bit. So I'm just gonna go on to the next part, which is adding in cornstarch. I don't want to add it in directly. What I like to do and what should be done is you put a little bit of the liquid from the pan into the cornstarch, mix it all together, and then you put it back in and let it boil off. Okay, and that should work really quickly, so I don't want to leave it on too terribly long. And that is exactly the thickness that I need. It should be just to the point where you can scrape the spoon or spatula across the bottom and it'll leave a nice trail there. And now we're just gonna add this into the apples that we set aside and toss that around a bit. This is not gonna be fun to clean up later. Now we just mix that all together quickly. Yeah, it's starting to get kind of a caramel apple consistency here. It's maybe thickening up a little bit more than I meant for it to. Oh yeah, that candied a little bit. Yeah, it cooled a little too quickly when it went into the bowl. That's okay, we'll figure it out. So I'm gonna set this aside, and now we can get started on the cheesecake part. So I'm using a stand mixer with a paddle attachment, but you can also use a hand mixer, or if you have the fortitude, you can do it by hand. So first I'm gonna cream together the cream cheese and the sugar. I use 4 8-ounce packages of cream cheese and half a cup of sugar. I've let these sit out for about an hour, and they're at room temperature now, or close enough that I can use them. I freak out a little bit when I get stuff on my hands, and so watching me cook is an interesting thing, because that's why I end up washing my hands about 1,000,000 times, because I can't stand getting sticky stuff on my hands. And working with cream cheese is just, ugh. Yeah. This is why a recipe that takes other people a really short amount of time takes me forever. Ah. I really love the smell of cream cheese. There's something about cream cheese that just like makes me think of Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of the really special holidays. My family would always do these like cinnamon sugar or chocolate cream cheese balls that you would eat with like really sweet graham cracker kind of things. I always loved that a lot. Okay, last one. And now we stir. Because I'm such a mess in the kitchen, I have learned over time to not put this at full speed when I'm trying to stir things. I start off at a lower speed and then increase as it goes so that I don't spray stuff everywhere. So if you needed a cooking for dummies technique, then there you go. So next we add in vanilla and sour cream. I put in about a half a teaspoon of vanilla and 1 full cup of sour cream for this. And the vanilla that I like to use is the Mexican vanilla blend that my mother-in-law gave me. It is just more delicious than regular vanilla. All right, that is nice and creamy. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a meringue, which is the most dangerous part of this recipe. Making a meringue, it's really easy to get it to deflate or to not rise up very well, so hopefully I can get it in the first try. And I have to be careful not to let the eggs get too warm while I'm doing this, and this part of the oven is still hot, so I'm gonna be a little bit closer to the camera. And I'm gonna be trying really hard not to get any eggshell into this. I'm also not going to get rid of the egg yolks or throw them away, because I can use those later to make homemade mayonnaise. Oh no, I got a little bit of shell in there. There, I got it out. You also have to be really careful not to get any egg yolk into there either, because that'll damage your meringue. All right, so we have our egg whites and we have our yolks. These are gonna be mayonnaise for me later. And, oh, I got egg all over the place. And the egg whites are gonna be our meringue for the cheesecake. So I'm gonna put the egg whites into a glass bowl. And I'm pulling out my handy dandy hand mixer for this. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna whip the egg whites into soft peaks. Then I'm gonna add in the sugar. I have here about 2 tablespoons of sugar that I'm gonna put in. And then after that, I'll just whip it up into stiff peaks. Okay, so we've got some nice stiff peaks in our meringue, and that means we can move on to the next part. What is the meringue for? The meringue is actually going into the cream cheese mixture, and I'm just gonna very carefully fold it in together. I could put it in here at a very low speed with the paddle, but I feel better about it just doing it by hand for this part. So we're just gonna scoop this in very carefully, trying not to deflate the eggs at all. And if you're not somebody who bakes on the regular, folding, the last thing that you want to do is like push down on the meringue that you made, because it'll deflate the eggs. And we want this to remain like nice and light and fluffy. So folding, I'll show you what it looks like, but it's basically just very carefully mixing it together without stirring. And so you just fold the mixture in on itself. And cheesecake is one of these recipes that you never want to over mix cheesecake once the eggs go in. And so folding is the best way to do it. So what I'm doing is I'm coming around the edge to the bottom, and then I'm just gently bringing it up over the top and just repeating that way until it's all nicely mixed together. And we've had the oven going since the beginning, so it should have a lot of steam going in there, which is what we want with the pans that I put in at the beginning. Sorry if I make funny faces while I do this. My hands are getting so messy. I'm super excited about this cheesecake. I cannot wait to actually eat it later. I want to try and keep this as even as possible, so I have a spoon that I'm going to use that should give me the right amount for everything. You don't want to fill these all the way to the top. Typically I would say about 2/3 full would be ideal. So this is what my cheesecake pan looks like right now. And what I'm going to do is I'll take the apples that I have set aside that should have the sauce all over it and the cinnamon sugar that's been sitting there for a while, and I'm just going to arrange it on the top, making sure it touches all the edges of the cupcake. And I'll typically try to arrange it in a nice pretty pattern. If I were making the big cake, what I do is I will sort of arrange it in a flower pattern around the center, and so I'll arrange it to where it's like that, just going in a full circle, and it'll usually take 2 or 3 rings of that. I'm also trying not to get any of the slices that are too thick. A nice thinly sliced apple like this, that typically does a lot better with this recipe. If you prefer apple chunks, I'm sure you could make it work. It's just it's going to have more of the crispness left in it, which will also make it a little bit harder to cut through. You also want to be really careful to make sure you get off all of the peel and any of the core bits of it, and that's just for texture reasons as well. Because sometimes if you leave the peel on, then it'll have a little bit of a like plasticky kind of feel when you try and bite through it, and that is no bueno. So this is what the cheesecakes look like, and now I'm just gonna put it into the oven. Oh no, I'm not. I almost forgot the most important part. My sauce didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. If it had, then I would have just put the apples on it. However, because it did not, I'm going to go for option number 2, which is putting a brown sugar crumble on top. It It just makes like a nice little crispiness on top that isn't too difficult to bite through. It's very sweet and it's just an absolute delight to have with this. So I'm gonna make that real quick. So the way that I make it is I'll take a small bowl. You need just a little bit of butter. Having it softened at room temperature is best, but you can do it with it cold like this one is. And then you need brown sugar and flour. You can measure this. It is completely possible to measure this. I'm not going to measure this. I'm just gonna use an equivalent amount of flour and brown sugar, and it's gonna be about a handful. It's ridiculous that I do this to myself. And the brown sugar, it's gonna go really nicely with all the other brown sugar flavors that are in the whole thing. So then just with our hand, we're gonna press that all in together. We're looking for it to be about like pea-sized grains. This is kind of like making a pie crust if you do it with your hands, where you like smash it in together and make these nice little flakes that burn off easily in the crust. I don't know if other people do it that way, but I saw it on a cooking video and I liked it, so that's what I do now. So they're nice and crumbly like that. And then we just sprinkle it over each individual cupcake. If you ever had like a streusel muffin, this is the same kind of stuff that would go over the top. The butter in this is also really good because it helps the apples cook nicely without getting a bad texture to them in the oven. Okay, so we have our cheesecake cupcakes with the streusel on top, and I'm just gonna brush off the little bits so it doesn't get stuck to the pan, and then it'll go straight into the oven. I don't know why I do so much with my hands when it just bothers me so much. Yeah, and there's still, oh, all that steam. There's still plenty of water in my pan, so I don't have to worry about filling that up. So the cupcakes, the cheesecake cupcakes, go on the rack immediately above the water that we have in there. And we are going to set the time for 18 minutes. Actually, I'm gonna go about 15 minutes. With cheesecake, you don't ever want to open the oven door too early because you can ruin your cheesecake that way. So you have to get really good at looking at it and making sure it's not getting overbaked without actually opening the door, which can be kind of a trial. If you start to see it to where it's rising up really high on the edges, you definitely want to take a look at it at that point, because that's when it's starting to get more set on the outside. Like I said, the center of it, when you jostle it a little bit, the very center of it will jiggle just a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to just shake the pan, because if you shake the pan, it can also make your cheesecake crack. And the best kind of cheesecake is with, like I said, with a nice flat smooth surface. So you don't want the outside edges to rise up too much, because it's going to start getting overcooked. Afterwards, you also want to open the oven door or crack it a little bit. One of the ways that you can do that is you can take a wooden spoon and you can just crack it open and set it in there, and it'll leave it open just enough so that some air can get in there and it'll start to come to temperature. So now I just have the oven opened, and I'm just gonna leave it that way until it fully cools off. I turned off the oven. Normally I wouldn't take this out until the pan cools down enough to where I can touch it. I think though I'm gonna pull one cupcake out so that you can get a chance to look at it. Let's hope I can do this without burning myself. So I still have the oven open, but I just have it propped open a little bit. That way I don't run into it. But here is final cheesecake. And because I pulled this one out a little bit too soon just so you could see it, it's still a little bit underset. What's going to happen while it's sitting in there, it's going to cool down, it's going to give it a chance to set a little bit more. It'll have a nice like creamy, firm texture to it. And I'll just pop it, once it's fully cooled in there, I'll pop it out, put it on a plate, and then I can store it in the refrigerator. Storing it in the refrigerator, because of the apples and the streusel on top, it might end up getting a little bit soggy with the streusel instead of that nice crisp texture on top, but it will still taste delicious. Oh yeah, that came out perfect. I am really excited about this. That is my cheesecake recipe, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. I'll let these cool down, and I will see everybody later.